Welcome to the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes for assignment 2A in my Scalable Microservices courses in the spring of 2024. So a couple things here to start with. If you didn't follow the instructions in the preliminary walkthrough of frequently made mistakes and update your code accordingly as per my instructions on the Piazza site, your code was not reviewed. Likewise, if you didn't thoroughly comment your code, it was not reviewed. You're just missing out on opportunities to get feedback here, so make sure you follow these instructions. Let's take a look now at the database API class. So first of all, make sure you have the proper formatting. There's no need to have two slashes here, just one is necessary. Please make sure to use symbolic constants, string constants, rather than using hard-coded string literals. And also don't put a slash in front of route name. Something important is missing here. It should go here. And down here, don't use the query annotation, use the path annotation. That's the way that this particular type of operation works to create the appropriate kind of path variable for the underlying get URL. Down here, something important is missing, and make sure you use string constants instead of string literals here. This should not be done like this, and you're missing something important here, which should be pretty obvious if you look at what the code looks like here. Once again, don't use query, but use path. Something important is missing here. You need to make sure you put the appropriate operation name after the timed prefix. And something important here is missing, assuming that the search query constant doesn't have a leading slash. Down here, this is the wrong annotation for doing a post. You should think carefully about that. And of course, avail yourself of ChatGPT's help and/or take a look at the video we did for things like the quotes services case study. Down here, there's something important missing here. And that's basically the kinds of problems that I saw with the database API interface. Now down here, something important is missing because there's no annotation, so that's not going to work, of course. Let's now turn our attention to the database sync proxy class. You can see here that this code is too complicated. Just make sure you follow the same approach that I show in the video lecture on the quote services app case study, structure and functionality of client classes. There's a very specific, simple way to do this, and you shouldn't make it more complicated than it needs to be. Let's now go take a look at the get timings method, which is in the timer proxy class. Down here, this is the wrong signature for get timings. There's not supposed to be any parameter here, so make sure you don't make changes to the skeletons, but instead follow what they do. There's no need to pass the route name here, because route name is something that is not needed to select between different timer services. There's no need to have a try-catch clause here, and this is passing the wrong parameter to get timings from the timer API class. Instead, you should use one of the symbolic constants that's defined in the constants.java file. Down here, this is another issue with get timings. This code is way too complicated. Use exactly the same technique that's used in the database sync proxy to avoid repeating code unnecessarily. This is a good example of violating the don't repeat yourself principle. Now let's move into the movies class. Movies is over on the server side. A couple things to note here. First, something very important is missing here. You need to read the comments and make sure you implement them. Likewise, there's a bunch of things missing here. There's no methods that are defined. So there's actually 3 methods that should be defined here, and they're all missing. This class apparently just wasn't filled in at all. Because the person who implemented this didn't implement the implements interface up here, then there's going to be some problems with using the wrong method names. So you need to override the compare to method, not the compare method. Don't really know what compare is meant to be, but it's not the right method. This code also doesn't handle the case where the ID is null. So here's a better way to do this, but make sure that you comment your code. Make sure that to comment your code. It's not enough just to cut and paste my code that I show you here, but you have to add comments so we can understand that you are knowledgeable about what this code is supposed to be doing and how it works. This is the wrong method signature for equals. It should be equals object. Once again, if you implement the right interface, you'll get the right override to do. This implementation is inadequate, and we'll talk about why in a second. Here's a more complicated interface. It's too complicated, and instead you can do this technique, But again, make sure you comment your code. This technique works properly even if the ID field is null. So that's why we do it. Down here, once again, this is another example of things being too complicated. Let me just put down the right signature here. So this code is too complicated. There's also no need to compare the vectors for equality. That was not part of the requirement. So just do this particular approach just like we did above, but once again, be sure to comment your code. This code is also too complicated. Once again, use this solution and make sure you comment your code. Make sure you implement the hash code method. However, there's no need to include the vector in the hash. And down here, this particular implementation is correct. However, the comment here that says compute hash code by combining the hash codes of ID and vector fields is wrong. There's no combination of vectors, so make sure you use the right comments. Down here, there's no need to check whether or not the ID is equal to null. However, you do need to call objects hash with the ID. That will properly handle the case where the ID field is null. So this code is unnecessary. Now let's move into the database repository implementation. This code is way too complicated and totally misses the point of the assignment, which is to use the Spring Data API. Don't be hard coding queries like this. It's a feature that Spring supports, which is nice, but it's much better to use the appropriate data API naming conventions to get the same behavior, the right behavior. Speaking of naming conventions, you need to make sure that you use the right names here. There is no movie field or column called title, so both of these things aren't going to work. And in fact, IntelliJ will warn you about this, so make sure you take a look at the warnings. Something very important is missing here. This is failing to sort in ascending order, so that's wrong. Once again, think carefully, read the specification comments carefully to see what's supposed to happen. Also, you need to be using the right Spring Data API keywords. These method calls here do not do that. And so as a result, this won't do anything useful whatsoever. Down here, now we're moving into the database service implementation. This is way too complicated and once again completely misses the point of the assignment, which is to use the Spring Data API. Putting in this explicit code really defeats the whole purpose of using the Spring Data API. So make sure you understand what you're doing here. Down here, there's no need to call decode on the query parameter because we're not passing regular expression syntax. This is a database lookup, not regular expressions. And down here, I don't recommend using this approach where you call the search method with turning the string query into a list with one item in it, because this is just going to be unnecessarily inefficient. And there's a better way to get the don't repeat yourself principle, as we'll take a look at in some of the methods coming up. So now let's take a look at search. A lot of issues with search. First, make sure you read the comments carefully that provide the specification. You're supposed to create a parallel stream, not a stream. Secondly, when you use a parallel stream, you can't use flat map. So instead of doing flat map, you want to use multi-map. Make sure you look carefully at the syntax here and copy it correctly. And then if you want to find out information about what map multi is, please take a look at this video from one of my other classes. And again, make sure you comment your code. It's not just enough to blindly cut and paste what I'm doing, but make sure you understand how it works and why it works. Down here, this type of code can be improved by calling to the search method that takes a single parameter. That's the one here. And that's how you can abide by the don't repeat yourself principle. And you'll notice that that's in fact what I did up here. Also, there's no need to pass any parameter to sorted. Just make it a call with no parameters. And of course, that'll only work if you implement the movies class methods correctly, which you should be doing. And make sure you have a call to distinct before you call sorted. You can do it the other way around too, but you need both distinct and sorted. Down here, this implementation is just way too complicated and inefficient. There's no need to make a set. And there's also no need to pass any parameter to sorted, as we talked about above. That should be handled by having the right operators for comparison in your movies class. Down here, once again, don't be using flat map and map. Instead, use map multi and make sure you comment your code. And there's also two things that are missing here. Read the specification comments carefully. They'll tell you exactly what you need to be doing. Not sure why people aren't reading those, and this also probably should be failing your tests, so I don't know why you're not trying to fix the tests. This is the last method that has problems for search with a list of strings. There's no need for a local variable here. Just return the result of the parallel stream with the toList terminal operation is what returns the value of a list from search. Down here, make sure you comment your code. Make sure you call sorted here as part of the stream. And there's no need to do this kind of sort on the list, but instead you just need to make sure that you implement all the methods in the movie class as we talked about in the earlier part, especially hash code. If you leave out hash code, then you're going to have some problems. So this can be cleaned up. There's no need to call movies.sort at all. That should be handled by calling sorted here. So that's the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes for assignment 2A. Make sure you address all those issues in your revision. Also, make sure when you submit your final version of assignment 2 that you have all the tests working for the previous versions. I'll talk about that in class. A lot of people missed a lot of points because they didn't follow the instructions. If you go back and watch the intro video for the course, I say this is one of the most important things you have to remember to do, and people just keep missing that. So that's the end of this. If you have any questions, please let me know.